Get started. Welcome everybody. Thanks everyone for joining us. This is the brainchild of Liz Johnson. If you know Liz, she's on the line. Something that we have longed to do for quite some time, which is an interview series, and we call it Resource Exchange. This is episode 1, and Liz will post a link to our webpage where we hope to continue to do this. Interviewing members of the PBB community, also talking with other change champions who we work with throughout the year, and hopefully a few times per month. This is the very first one that we've had a chance to do, and with us today, thanks very much. We're so happy to have John Dance from the city of Fort Saskatchewan. John, can you evaluate my enunciation? Am I close?
I think you got it pretty close, Chris. If Liz was still on the line, we'd actually ask her to say, because she kind of puts that extra syllable in Fort Saskatchewan when she says Fort Saskatchewan.
John, I am going to defend myself. The Texas comes out.
The spirit of this, we have the luxury from where we sit at Resource X to hear so many of the stories of what the implementing communities are accomplishing. We get to learn firsthand how you're evolving the work. Our main platform for sharing these ideas has typically been our annual conference. In this environment, clearly we did not have an annual conference this year, and the future of events like those, we'll see how that turns out. We will sure do everything possible to have an annual conference as soon as we're allowed to. But short of that, having an opportunity to talk with PBB pioneers like John gives everybody a chance to learn from one another. We're recording the session, and we hope to be able to share these with everybody who couldn't attend as well. So it's a conversation. Feel free to enter dialogue or questions in the chat. We have a series of questions to ask John, and really want to get right into it with probably something most interesting. John, what are you reading?
What am I reading? Actually, you know what? I haven't been reading a lot, but I'm going to change that question around because we spent a lot of time over the summer traveling to the mountains within Alberta. So we're just outside Edmonton and Fort Saskatchewan. So it's about, if you go to Banff, it's about a 4-hour drive, and about the same to Jasper. So a lot of podcasts in the car. So I just need to give a plug to Malcolm Gladwell and Revisionist History podcast. Without a doubt, the content is fascinating, but without a doubt, one of the most creative podcasters, and how he can weave stories together and in seemingly fairly uninteresting topics at times, but just phenomenal. So Malcolm Gladwell podcast, Revisionist History. That's what I'm listening to, because it's not good to drive in the car with reading.
Thanks for that. The storytelling aspect gripped you. Is that it seems to be Gladwell's style?
It's a storytelling aspect, but it's also how he just brings it all together. I don't know how he does it. And I'll listen to other people on podcasts, and they just don't have the same skill that he does. And the last one of the ones that stuck with us on our last trip was he talked about it was about Elvis Presley and how he had issues with certain words in certain songs. And then he goes back to Freud and parapraxis and Freudian slips, and why Elvis couldn't get the words in live concerts for a very specific part, a bridge in a very specific song. So fascinating. But yeah, it's all about the stories. I'm a big proponent of stories, and he does just about the best I've ever seen.
John, speaking of stories, would love for you to share your own story of what led you to get into local government. One of the things I know I've shared with you, when we started this whole mission, we didn't get into it because of business reasons. We were on a mission to bring this work to other people who might be inspired by it. And what I never thought all along the way is that I'd end up meeting people like you who are equally inspired, trying to make positive change. Having crossed paths is something that I'll forever be grateful for. But I'd love for you to go back into your own history and your own story of how you got into all this.
How I got into it, it's interesting because I'm a recreation guy, a recreation person. So a lot of people in municipal government seem to come from a background of recreation. So I have a degree in physical education and recreation. And for the first part of my career, I was solely working within, fitness and recreation facilities. And then I had an opportunity to be a part of opening a major rec facility in another municipality close by. And it was also where I happened to live, so took advantage of that opportunity. So I'd say I kind of put my life and my work career into periods, if we're going to stick with hockey analogies. First couple periods of my career were pretty much solely recreation, and it's a huge, important core value of mine is just fitness and wellness. Then I had an opportunity to get outside the box, and there was a secondment that was with a smaller municipality to go be their chief administrative officer. And from there, went into corporate planning back at my original municipality. And from corporate planning is where the priority-based budgeting stuff came in. So I was working in strategic and corporate planning, and the organization was dipping their toes into priority-based budgeting. And I was thinking this morning, Chris, it's probably 2012, 2013 might have been the time frame when Strathcona County was working on the initial stages of priority-based budgeting with both you and John Johnson. And that's kind of where it came. It's just been a journey, but it all starts with recreation.
All starts with recreation. Funny, we had an informal Resource X poll about your favorite Fort Sask program, and curling club, speaking of recreation, made it up there in the list, narrowly beaten by sheep grazing. And I thought, that's a good recreation tie-in. John, tell us a little bit about Fort Sask as a city, and maybe something fun and unique.
It's a pretty cool little city. It's about 30,000 people. So, and it's within proximity of the major metropolitan area that we have, which is Edmonton, which is over 1 million people. So we're probably, maybe 20, 30 kilometers. So maybe 15, 20 miles from a major metropolitan area. It's a great size. It's got incredible history. I think it goes back to the late 1800s and real strong ties to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, so the RCMP. It's right on a river. The town is right on a river. The city's right on the river. It's got a great river valley, great trails. From a kind of a municipal government perspective, we're very fortunate. We've got a really solid tax assessment base, and we've got lots of strong non-residential tax assessment, which is a gift. Some of our industrial tax assessment goes back to the 50s and 60s, actually. Some of the industry that was established goes right back to the 1950s and 60s. Really good growth. It's not crazy growth, but it's really steady. I think we're averaging about 3.5% population growth over the last 10 years. So it's just a really cool community. It's close to everything, great highway access to things. The unique fun thing, which I think we've all had a bit of laughs with, is our unique program of sheep grazing. So it is a quartile 2 program. I had to actually ask that question before I came on the call. It's a quartile 2 program. And it's been around. It's actually it's kind of got a new twist this year. It's been around for almost 30 years. So they literally work. So there's about 40 sheep, and they are literally working through certain parts of the year on cutting and trimming the grass. So there's 40 sheep. There's a few border collies, and then there's shepherds as well. So it's also become a huge tourism attraction. So there's formal parades when the sheep come in at the beginning of the season. There's formal leaving parades when they leave to go back. The shepherds, though, are retiring. So we are actually went through an initial RFP for shepherds, for sheep grazing shepherds. So we're going to have to expand that a little bit just to try to recruit some people to actually be these shepherds. So it's a cool program that serves a really practical function. And the fact that it also becomes a tourism thing. The fun we also had this year is we brought in, they work in certain areas of the river valley, but we had some really steep slopes in other areas of the river valley that had noxious weeds. So we actually brought in goats. Just, it was all okay with the sheep that we brought them in, but we brought them in on a temporary basis in order to deal with some of the aspects that the sheep weren't able to deal with.
I can't wait to hear more details about this RFP process and the qualifications that you're looking for in the shepherds. We have, everybody from Flagstaff, Arizona to Napa, California, on the line for organizations who are looking for innovation. This is Welcome to the Resource Exchange. This is a tremendous program and something totally unique that we have not seen. John, I gave my mascot to our 2-year-old, the foam sheep, and it's among her favorites. It's
very cool. Yeah, it's really kind of the identity of the community, actually. Like it's everywhere, so it's a big part of Fort Saskatchewan.
Learning a little bit more about you, John, tell us a little bit about your particular role, your job overall, your role in priority-based budgeting, and maybe what your favorite aspect is of the job, and maybe the biggest challenge as well.
Sure. I'm general manager of corporate services, so I have the privilege of being able to work with all the internal serving departments. So the finance, human resources, people services, we call it, legislative services, legal services, and IT. So I get to work with those departments. I have been doing it for almost 4 years. So I've been in this position for about 4 years now. Best part of the job, without doubt, is just the people I get to work with. And, you talked earlier, Chris, about just making things just a bit better. And that's really what really energizes me, and what gives me job satisfaction is just working with the people, and then just seeing things improve, even if it's incrementally, and seeing things improve. The beauty I have of, working with priority-based budgeting this time is I've done it once already. So not that we made a lot of mistakes the first time, but the first time there was lots of things that are different. And then also priority-based budgeting and Resource X is completely different than it was in the initial stages. So I have the luxury of being able to pass along some of that experience to, to the people who haven't been involved with it previously. So that's probably the most satisfaction that I get out of the work that I do. What was that? There was one more there. Yeah, I think.
Biggest challenge of your work.
That was one because you guys, obviously, I'm not going off the cuff with all these questions. You sent me the questions in advance. I really struggled with that one. We're fortunate as a city to have what we do. We're fortunate with, the elected officials who are with us. We're fortunate with the resources that we have, the people that we have. This last, 8 or 9 months has really challenged us with, with the things we've experienced through COVID. But we've also seen amazing resilience from everybody in terms of how we respond. So it's always interesting, and the work is always changing, and the work is very fast paced, but it's a good thing. I can't really articulate any one single thing that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah. Well, then I'll take the bait on COVID. One thing that, unites us all in this webinar and certainly across the community is how COVID has impacted us in our personal lives, in our work, and in our communities. And I would love for you to share what the biggest impact of COVID has been on your community and the city's work.
There's two things that kind of, I'm going to go to the kind of the community initially. And the biggest thing, and as I had said earlier, my background is recreation. I have huge value in fitness and wellness. The single largest thing I see in Fort Saskatchewan, I see in other communities in the region, is how COVID has brought people outside. How our trail systems, how our tennis courts, pickleball courts, roads for bicyclists, how families and how individuals have gotten outside and become more active. And I just hope that, I hope we keep up that. Obviously ours is going to change a little bit more when winter comes. But that's just the really positive aspect of a community being able to do that, and how people have looked after one another. I've met neighbors on our street that, we've always said hi and acknowledged each other. But, in the early stages, it was like, let's go sit in the driveway and talk to somebody who I always have just ever said hi to, and not really known that person. So I think there's some real positive stuff out of COVID. From a city municipal administrative perspective, we have come together more and been more innovative. We probably put more innovation into the last, 5 or 6 months than we would have in years. The things that we thought we could never do, the things that we've achieved through technology. The piece that I find always fascinating is all of our scoring for all of our programs, all of our capital projects, and all of our peer review was done through WebEx. We never had a single in-person meeting to do all of those aspects. So it was a pretty cool opportunity when you say, well, all of this is happening, but the people who are super users for priority-based budgeting just said, no, we're going to do this, and we're going to do all of our peer review scoring on WebEx, which, you think of the logistics around that and how it all happened, but they didn't. So I think it's just brought us together. Electronic, things that we had never thought of or were planning to do just had to happen almost immediately. So some really positive stuff has occurred as well, and we're still dealing with it, and but some really just brutal decisions that had to be made as well, in terms of that the people who weren't able to keep their jobs, or facilities that had to close for periods of time. So some tough stuff too.
Yeah, there's a lot to dig into there. I want to hit a couple of them. One on bringing people outside. I saw Shauna from City of Lethbridge said one of her trails had 166% increase in usage this year. Amazing. John, do you see that? I know you mentioned the winter, and you'll see how that has an impact on everybody's ability to come outside. But did you see service level increases to accommodate or to promote this healthy lifestyle and the recreation opportunities?
I think we saw service level changes in modifications and in the initial stages of COVID when we weren't inside, but we did have the ability to do things outside. We were holding fitness classes, as one example, on a large artificial turf football field. So, you were still able to achieve, a fitness class, because, that for some people, that's an important part of their fitness and routine, but the indoor spaces weren't open at the time, but why not have it outside? So a lot of creative things to be able to do. And, most of our recreation facilities are open. There's limited capacity to it, but just working around all of those restrictions that we have in order to keep the people who use those spaces safe has been an interesting process. I would, it's impacted a lot of departments, I think, across municipalities, but boy, has recreation been they've had some of the deepest challenges and some of the biggest hits, but also some of the most, we're asking a lot of the recreation and culture and parks people.
Similarly, you mentioned the service level changes, and you were getting into the way that you've used technology, even in the PBB process itself. I'm really curious if your PBBI data, your program inventory, has been a tool or been useful to you as you've gone through COVID. Just talking about programs, being able to identify what it is that you do, to talk about, should we do it outside, or should we use technology in a different way to address service level changes? I would love your perspective on how that program data has been a part of any of these transitions.
Without question, Chris, absolutely. Like I'm a huge proponent of program data, and to be quite honest with you, if municipalities were even able to get to that point, I think it's just a gold mine to have programs. I kind of always look back and I think, okay, and I compare a program budget to a line item budget, and both have importance and both have merit. But to be able to communicate, to be able to help make decisions, to be able to tell elected officials or the public, the program information is just gold. So absolutely critically important as we worked through things. And then immersed ourselves in, preparing next year's budget as well. Like we're right in the heart of preparing 2021's budget, and to be able to use that program data to help us be informed about what decisions we have to make with budget, because we've lost, there's lots of different revenue impacts that we've had. There's been lots of changes that the provincial government has provided to us that force us to find new resources to cover some things that aren't happening anymore. So programs just are gold, as to quote a Seinfeld episode. It's just gold.
Oh man, whoever posts that in the chat, a video link to, that's gold, Jerry. I forget the character's name. It's the other comedian.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna come to me. Yep, Banyan, Kenny Banyan, Banyan.
Fun fact about John Dance, that's Seinfeld trivia right on the top of his mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Big fan of Seinfeld too.
John, you were starting to mention how you are using some of the program data in your upcoming budget, talking about revenue decreases. I would love for the audience to hear how you have started to use the insight functionality. This is all pretty new stuff, and how that's playing out. If you wouldn't mind giving a description of how you're using that in your budget process.
Yeah, you bet. We've, and maybe I'll just take a step back too, Chris, because we one of our strategies, and I know it kind of goes against some of the approaches that things are moving quicker, in some cases through ResourceX to get it done. We really took our time implementing priority-based budgeting in Fort Saskatchewan for a couple of different reasons. It just to be able to manage it amongst a fairly lean organization, but also to give people time to absorb some of this. So we first and foremost did programs and program costing, and went through a budget cycle with solely programs and program costing. Introduced that to the organization. It also allowed us to do some really good cleanup of our chart of accounts in our financial systems, and to be able to integrate and merge how our financial system works with the priority-based budgeting software. The second piece, we kind of left that sit for 2020, and then we moved into actually the scoring. So we did the scoring, got all that. We took the approach, once we had all the scoring complete, that did the training with the different departments. We borrowed from another municipality who escapes me now, it might have been Littleton, and said, pick three programs. We used the pretty standard insights comments. I think there were 6 or 7 insights comments that we had, asked each department to identify an insight with each of their programs. And then from those programs for 2021, we asked them to pick three to study and provide some, whether changes were going to occur or whether you studied them and there was no conclusion. That something else needed to be done, or that it needed more work in future years. So kept that really as front and center, just as that manageable piece of the thing, recognizing that all of these departments have tons of other things that are going on, tons of other constraints that pull at them. And this was meant to be something manageable in the first year. We'll dig in more in next year into 2022's budget. But that was kind of the approach we took this year, was to pick those. And we saw some really interesting things. We kind of saw a lot of service level reviews and a lot of service level decreases being suggested. We also saw a number of cost recovery things that occurred as well. And then just innovation that do things differently in creative ways. So it's a process. And I think, as we go into why, some of the reasons why and how do you embed this in an organization, I believe part of it is just that slow process. I know there's different ways to do it and do it quick, or to do it slow. And in this case, we just did it more slowly.
That's great. I would love for you to elaborate. You and I have had several conversations on what are the signs, the pieces of evidence that the culture is really starting to take it on. I think you had mentioned to me one example of an elected official even asking about some work taking place that it might have been taking care of some of the medians and wondering if there was a program for that. But people even talking in programmatic language, asking about programs, that alone, as you said, that's a breakthrough. This is not something we're used to talking about.
Absolutely, and I'll give you even a recent example. We're doing a lot of work on asset management, and in terms of just formalizing a process, and we've got a lot of pieces of the asset management system, like with the 14 departments or who are doing a really good job, but it's not necessarily integrated and it's not all connected. But we were talking about it and developed a policy for council to consider, and one of the questions they asked last week is, well, what does our program look like for asset management in terms of our program inventory through priority-based budgeting? So the fact that one of the elected officials asked that question was really cool, and it is something that we need to mature, because we've kept it's primarily tangible capital assets in finance, but we've kept it within the finance department. But it's one of those growing things that we need to do, which is kind of the next iterations of what we want to achieve, is to start to move some of these programs outside departments, and cross-departmental programs like asset management need to be seen across the organization. And I think our first step was let's keep in the departments as our first program step, and then start to move outside departments, which again is just kind of this systematic approach to doing this.
I do want to head in that direction in just a moment about your thoughts on the future, where you might head next. Just going back for 1 second, you have implemented this in Strathcona County. You're now in Fort Sask, and I think you have some perspective on what takes place when it really does start to take hold in your culture. People start to talk about programs. They're asking about asset management, and it's been interesting, John. We have many of our organizations who it's a moment. You start to realize. I think you were at the PVB conference 2 years ago, and Josh Showman from Washington County was talking about it was not all pretty in the very beginning days, and then he defined the storming and the norming and the performing components, that particular model. And then something clicked, and it's still something they have to shepherd, to use the Fort Sask term, to keep that culture going, but it takes work to make it happen. I would love if you had some thoughts on what you have done to institutionalize PVB in your organization, or thoughts on what you might do. I know everybody's always interested in it, us included.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Chris, because you and I have talked about this, and it is, and actually recently we, as I said earlier, we're kind of finalizing our 2021 budget, and we're at senior leadership. We're of course talking about, well, we just got to come down just a little bit more, but it's just this constant reminder that you have to make, and champions with the organization have to make it, because when the pressure's on, and we're talking about, we've got to reduce in this particular area, we're often just default back to line items and say, well, let's talk about training and development. Let's talk about materials and supplies. And we get out of this program mindset that we've tried to shepherd, as you say. But when pressure's on, and I'm guilty of this as well, it's like, oh, geez, why did we start talking about training and development? Why didn't we get more of a program conversation going? But it's really, I think it is. It's just vigilance. It's just continually reminding people, and it's system-wide buy-in that you just can never stop. It starts with elected officials. We had, having them understand it, because I firmly believe that the vast majority of people, when you say priority-based budgeting, have no idea. They think it's this easy button that replaces, you press it and everything's done for you. Senior leadership, executive sponsors who understand it. I think that's the other critical piece, is getting those people who are going to be the sponsors of this actually fully understanding it. And again, I had the luxury of doing this twice, so I think I have a good understanding. Your super users, without a doubt, we are so fortunate in Fort Saskatchewan to have a couple rock star exceptional super users who are part of our budget team as well. And they've done a phenomenal job. the directors and the departments, probably the biggest thing is just not leaving them on their own, of helping them out, of doing some work for them and having manageable chunks of tasks that they have to do. It's complicated and it's difficult, and it's just one more thing they have to do. So wherever we can, we've tried to help departments do the work. So whether it was in the scoring, the other piece is to try to make steps easy. So the fact that we can link or merge our financial systems with priority-based budgeting, it's not, it's not just pushing a button, but it's not that somebody has to spend, multiple days trying to move our financial software into the costing for priority-based budgeting. So constant reminders, the openness to say, this is one piece of data and it's a hugely important piece of data. We can have a whole other conversation about quartiles, but yeah, it's an important piece, but there's other factors as well. There's other things that we need to consider. And, we've gone through, and we'll probably get to it a little bit later on, but we've gone through and done our capital projects. Our 10-year capital plan has been completely scored. But those are important pieces of data, both for quartiles as well as kind of the detail behind the results and the individual scores. But there's other factors that need to be considered. But, to be able to say, here's a capital project, here's how it aligns to 7 different community priorities and 5 different attributes. I don't think there's any better way to try to come up with objective scoring of a capital project, but not to say that a quartile 1 project is just a slam dunk and you need to go ahead, or a quartile 4 won't happen. There's other reasons that it may or may not, but having that as the first set of data is just so important.
I would love for you to go further into the capital side of things. I mean, I think that is a big step that you took that not everybody does. Most organizations certainly begin on the operating side, and some continue to apply this methodology to their capital investments and their capital plan. Would love for you to share your experience, how you went about it, and how it's working out. And I loved your perspective on, quartiles are just one piece of information among many others that are vital in decision making.
One piece of information, but it seems to be the piece that people attach on to as kind of that first thing. So capital wise, we did the exact same process. We had individual departments who were responsible for capital projects score all of their 10-year, we do a 10-year capital plan. So they scored all of their projects in the 10-year capital plan. So probably, 50, 60 different individual projects, brought in that peer review team again to do individual results or individual attributes to score them as the peers. And then we just simply went through the software and resultant of different scores and different quartiles. So it provides a really cool data set. The quartiles are a little bit, because the way that the quartiles 1s and 2s, so you'll see a quartile 2 program and you go, how did that score quartile 2 and how did this one? Because they're seemingly different. A reinvestment in an existing recreation piece of infrastructure versus building brand new. So but again, you got to look deeper and you got to go to the story behind the individual scores. What I find most fascinating, because we've done our capital projects, capital budget already. So we separate out our capital budget prior to operating. So we did our first review of our capital budget and capital plan with council on the 1st of October. We won't do our operating until November. But great conversations, because they're going, how is that possible that those 2 scored the same in the same quartile? When, but then it questions, well, maybe we need to look a little closer at our results and how we've defined our results as elected officials, because maybe they aren't producing, or maybe we haven't been clear enough as to what infrastructure really is as a result. And, should there be a stronger emphasis on reinvesting in existing infrastructure? So great conversations. And I think that's probably the other important piece that we want to talk about, is just the conversations that start because of the quartiles or because of the data with either capital or with programs.
Diana, it's a question regarding capital and the interplay between the capital projects and the operating programs that support the capital projects. It made me think really quickly. The city of Shawnee, Kansas, a couple of years back, did something similar in terms of their fleet replacement plan, where they said, okay, here's our entire fleet replacement program. Now let's look at individual programs who use the vehicles and question, are we shrinking any of these programs? And if so, what is the impact on our fleet replacement? And so one of their examples was an approach to either shared services or a lessening of services on their garbage collection program overall, and how that had a massive impact on their replacement of the garbage trucks overall. That was where my mind went. But John, how did that play out? Or did any questions come up as you're evaluating capital projects and the ongoing operating programs that support them?
Yeah, if anybody's interested, like our capital budget documents on the website, so just City of Fort Saskatchewan, so it does show what we produce. So each of those individual capital projects was then tied back to programs as well. So you did tie that back within the assessment. Some of them obviously are going to cover just about every single program. So if you look at a major rec facility or a swimming pool, it's going to encompass multiple programs. So tied back, but not strongly. I don't necessarily think it was a strong link back to individual programs. It was intuitive. It was obvious in most cases.
Sure.
But the biggest one, one of the ones we had really interesting that the administration had to present is we did have a quartile 4 program that we recommended actually jump the queue and even go into 220 because of all what I described, all of these other factors, in that there was a provincial government from St. Albert and Lethbridge will appreciate the very restrictive provincial grants that have come up over the last couple months. And it was a transfer station enhancement that was there. But a lot of it was for reasons and rationale outside its alignment to priorities. Number one and first and foremost is somebody else is going to pay for the whole thing, and it's one of the only projects that we have that's going to fit. But it was also interesting in that we don't necessarily within our current results have a strong emphasis on an environmental result. So it wasn't necessarily hitting that. So you start to see reasons as you digged into the data about why the score was what it was, why it might have not scored higher than quartile 4. So that other factors, I think, is another message that I really try to emphasize with people. It is important, it's critical data that we have, but we just don't use it alone to make these, these very large decisions. There's other things that come into it.
I love what you were just mentioning on the environmental side. Not necessarily having a result area where the program may have aligned, and you used other criteria to justify. We have City of Ann Arbor is the first to come to mind, and in some discussions with the City of Pittsburgh, where the question is, they long for emphasis on sustainability. They each have initiatives outlined and a price tag for what they need to have underway for climate action. I'm sure for Napa, who's on the line, you probably are in the same boat. But it has begged the question, a great conversation, like you're saying, do we have results as our elected body espouse that we really do care about environmental impact and sustainability? And so it is a two-way conversation. You learn from both sides. One, you might be surprised by a program or a project that scores highly, but then you go back in the data and you say, well, how does this align? It appears to, or vice versa. You have something that might appear less aligned, and it begs the question, we have not stated anything about environmental in our result areas. Are you headed in that direction? Is that like something of interest?
I think it's just a learning, actually, because the other part that I think is critical to being successful is continually reviewing both your results and your attributes as well as your program inventory every year. Like when this council worked on their results, they didn't really know the end game as to what would happen to those results. So now Now, because, you know, you say, well, what's important to the community? And we helped, and, you know, we drew out from our strategic plan and our municipal development plan and other, you know, guiding strategic documents to draw out these results. And, you know, spent some time with them, and and they made some changes and added some things, but, you know, they arrived at, I think, seven community and 6 governance results, and then really clear articulate definitions below, or sub-results below. But now they've seen the scoring against capital, and they will see more information about the operating. And now they have the opportunity to say, you know, did we get this right? Like, you know, are these things that we want to achieve? Or as an example, is infrastructure clear enough? Did we define that clear enough in order to, and maybe we did, I don't know, but we just got, you know, one who's asking. I assumed that that an existing infrastructure would get a higher priority than a new piece of infrastructure from a recreation perspective. And that's where it's interesting to dig a little deeper, because, you know, both, you know, and I'll use our example in our case, we have a new swimming pool in our 10-year capital plan, and then retrofit of an existing swimming pool. Both are quartile 2 projects. Both are quartile 2 on the surface. So you look at our list that we provide in our capital budget document, and both are quartile 2, and you go, well, they're quartile 2. In the budget document, a capital budget document, it also provides the detailed scoring as well as an appendix. So if you really wanted to, you can go and see how did each of them go compared to each other across the 7 results and 5 attributes. But the actual scoring was quite a bit higher. They were quartile 2. The retrofit of the existing was, I think, our 8th. I think it was the 8th highest program we had in our capital. The new was 28, I believe. I think it was the 28th one, the new swimming pool. But both of them were in quartile 2. So if you just stayed on the surface, you would think, well, those are both rated the same. But you just got to dig in deeper, and that's, you know, that's what we have to do, is be able to provide that information to decision makers or for administration to make those recommendations, is just going a bit deeper. Like, it's probably a good thing that, you know, the one that was retrofit scored a little bit higher, because that is just intuitively, you probably want to invest in what you have before you consider new. But if you stay on the surface, you don't get that.
Diane, that might address your question in the chat. Diane from St. Albert was curious if you were only scoring new projects versus any kind of maintenance projects overall. Sounds like you did both.
We did everything. Yep. All of the replacements, all of the infrastructure stuff, and as well as the new stuff, everything. The only thing we didn't do, and Chris, you wouldn't, I'm not sure if you have it in the States, is we have developer levy projects that are typically road or things that developers are paying for. So we didn't, we didn't score those. So, but every other project we scored, and we've chosen to do a 10-year plan, kind of as a guiding document. And our provincial legislation requires 5, but we went with 10. So, and again, the whole thing was done all on virtual means to score all of these capital projects.
Liz, thank you. Liz dropped in the 2021 proposed capital budget PDF file into the chat, so certainly take a look at that. John, I want to shift gears a little bit. Thanks for talking so much on the capital side. Oh, actually, I had one more question on capital. You're a methodical person, and you even expressed that maybe the way that you implemented in Fort Sask was slow and steady wins the race kind of approach. In retrospect, or for others to think about, was capital a shocker? And if you had to do it all over again, would you do capital first before programs? Is it easier? Did it just become natural because you'd already done the work on the programmatic side? I'm walking all around the general question of where does capital belong? And that'd be my last question on the capital side.
I don't know, because we did it worked well the way we did it. I don't know, it probably would have worked if you did capital first, but programs were the emphasis. And then ironically, it was an elected official who brought a motion forward for council to consider, to say, look, we want to prioritize our capital plan as well. And administration come back with some options about how we could do that. So we brought back a couple options, one of them being, well, why we have all the software, we have all of the experience in scoring, why don't we just do this? And I know it's not done a lot. There is quite a few municipalities who do it that you set us up with, that we had some conversations with. And it worked really well. I kind of like the way we did it, because the big ask was of the entire organization for programs, every single department. Our capital is probably 90% of our capital comes under 3 or 4 departments. So it was a smaller kind of workload for people. So I like the order.
Yeah. I only have a couple more questions from the list that we talked about, and then we did have some extra questions that came in from the registration as people signed up. My question is, the way we had worded it is, what is the most exciting way you've been able to communicate at the program level? And then a related question to that is, we're always looking for small wins, anything to build upon. And it often takes the shape of a program win. Here's something that you're able to get on the table or have a difficult conversation around. In the spirit of that question, what is your most exciting program story?
Oh man, I wasn't ready for that one. I don't know if it's the ones that come to mind are the ones where it's just like, oh wow, that's what that information is supposed to help us with. So it was provide information to elected officials about 2 instances actually come to mind. About, we don't have any dedicated intergovernmental resources in our organization. So no individual person is specifically responsible for working with other municipalities in the region or with our provincial or federal government. So we have a number of people who do the work. So but we cost it all out. We have a intergovernmental program area that takes a percentage of a number of people's time that is dedicated to intergovernmental, and those, especially St. Albert, would know our intergovernmental is quite, it's an onerous work just because of the different bodies that exist. So to be able to provide them with that information to say, oh my goodness, look at the resources that we're dedicating to this, even though we don't have a person, that's what's important. And then the other one is, again, maybe it's just I'm thinking of elected officials today, is we have a council support and program area. So that encompasses both senior leadership as well as our legislative services. And just to be able to articulate the time and the resources that are dedicated to council support was an eye-opener for people, because all they think of is, well, we have an admin person who helps us with this. So in their mind, they're thinking, well, that's our council support. But then you have to transfer all of the different other aspects in senior leadership and across the organization who are helping to support council as well. And it was an eye-opener in terms of what the data can provide. And those are 2 very simple ones. And there's things that happen all the time, but those are 2 that come to mind.
That's awesome. I will shift gears to, we had a handful of questions come in that were included in the registration. And one was, how do you create buy-in and ownership from departments as you navigate to this new way of budgeting?
And I think I've touched on it a lot in a couple of different questions, Chris. It's just that constant communication. It's people understanding it. It's spending the time, going slowly, providing, when things there was instances where we found that there were certain people who just needed somebody to work side by side with them on the scoring. And that's what we did. Rather than to say, here's the software, go do it. You guys did phenomenal, training with us, always available to be able to help us out. And maybe it's just because I feel we've been successful. We've got a long way to go. It's just that slow, methodical process I've found success with. I know there's quick ways to do it too, but this slow one and the appreciation and respect that we have for other things that are going on in the organization as well. So this is here. And then for people to be able to see the value, I think that's the single biggest thing. Okay, I see the value now. I see why we've done this. The biggest thing that I'm so proud of is that last year's budget, it was primarily presented our operating budget in a program budget. The line items were in the back. They were in each section. They were still there. They still had all the notes, but the actual presentation and the emphasis in the binder in our presentations was on a program and why programs were different from the previous year or what changes had to occur. So that's probably my biggest thing I'm most proud of at this point, is to be able to get to that point. And maybe, I'm not sure this year, but maybe they'll become an appendix, the line items. Maybe they're still there, but they're an appendix to the document.
That's epic. I'm so glad that came up. Liz, if you have a chance to post that link into the chat, that would be awesome. Or I know we're going to be linking some resources onto the webpage with this recording. We can include it there. But John, what you just said, from our earliest days, if you remember Kathy Novak, who was an elected official, and she said, the reason that we get into all these line item discussions is because right there in the budget book, you're leading us there. It's filled with nothing but line items. What do you want us to talk about? But you are, I don't know if we've ever seen it, the way that you had put it together, and for you to have that kind of an ambitious goal to say the actual budget book is filled with programs and programmatic change, and the line item detail is there if you need it. It's all backed by line items, but that is an awesome shift, and great job.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, there's a lot of people who've made it possible, and it's a lot of work because you're producing two different things, because we're just, as I say, we're just finalizing our 21 budget, and we're just kind of making our final decisions. And now the finance team has to go away and create a program, to finalize the program costing for all of these things and compare it back to 2020. And then they also have to do the same thing for the line items as well in order to feed into the program budget. So it's more work, but incredibly valuable for the organization, for the elected officials, and for the community to know. And especially in these times, as we've been fortunate to bounce back from a number of revenue uncertainties with what we thought of might be happening come March or April. We had no idea what would occur towards the end of the year. So the fact that we have this data and information to help us potentially make other decisions into the future is just a bonus as well.
This next question is, I'll do the serious one first, then we'll end on a fun note. The serious question was, where do you see PBB most effective between driving changes in the budget line items versus influencing bigger picture budget decisions and resource allocation?
And I think I talked earlier, I think we still kind of toggle back and forth to line items. And I would say it's an evolution, and I think that's the point. And making these big decisions is hard. But without these programs and changes in service levels, we will be bringing forward in this budget a number of pretty tough service level reduction asks of council. And we wouldn't have had that ability in the line item to be able to articulate it so clearly and to be able to cost it out as to what the potential savings are. So I'd say we're kind of a bit of both, maybe. In that it'll be very interesting to see when we bring these forward, because all of the data will be there. We'll know exactly where they align with the priorities, exactly where they hit the attributes. But they're going to hit the public in some cases as well. So, we just have to be able to have those conversations. And I think the data helps us have those conversations. We wouldn't have them without it.
I appreciate that answer. It makes total sense, what you just said. It's two-way street. Programs have embedded within them the line items. It's part of the DNA. Great answer and perspective. The last question, we have a suspicion of who wrote this question in, and it is, how have you been able to become such a PBB legend? I will make sure everybody knows this is a younger John Dance hosting the PBB Cup from just a few years back. John, in all seriousness, you've been a champion, and maybe a fun flavor of this question. I think that was our friend Kelly. put that question in. You have used these tools to your advantage, and maybe that's where you could take this anywhere that you want to go as we kind of bring this to a close. But you were already a leader in public service, and these tools have just been something that you've taken advantage of to further the kind of objective that you already had in mind. Maybe any last words of inspiration or wisdom on how to keep going?
Thanks. And yeah, I'm pretty sure it was my good friend Kelly who asked the question. It's really like, you know what, I'm just one person. There's just this whole, there you go. There's this whole team who does this work. And probably what drives me is, you know, I'm a huge believer in well, my values are so important. I genuinely believe in the system and the philosophy. That's as simple as it is. Like from the very first day that it was introduced to me through yourself and John, is like, this just makes perfect sense. It's so simple and it's so practical. Why wouldn't we do this? And then naively you think, well, you can just embed it in this very large organization. It shouldn't be a big deal. And then of course, that's when you learn all of the, you know, the fears. I can remember, Chris, having a dinner with you prior to providing an introduction to council and talking for what seemed like hours about every single word that you were going to say, because we were fearful of saying the wrong thing. But we thought about that so clearly. And then the other piece of this is it just goes back to, you know, my goal is to, like, I get my most job satisfaction of just making things a little bit better. And this is a tool that makes things a little bit better for the organization, for the community, and for finite resources. We all have finite resources, and this just helps us. And when we do look at these line item budgets that we produce in these complex budget binders, and then expect elected officials to have the understanding that we do, and to not go to that one line item that talks about your supplies and materials, then we're just, you know, we're not providing them with the right amount of information. So it's a good system, and I'm just one tiny little piece of it. And just as I say, I've had the opportunity, as others in the community have, of having done it a couple of times. That's the big thing.
It's oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that my only connection to the Edmonton Oilers, and my only thing I grew up playing minor hockey in Sherwood Park, which is just a community outside Edmonton. And Ken Hitchcock was the coach of my midget team, and I have the honor of being cut in my first year of midget. So not making the team, Ken Hitchcock having cut me in my first year of midget. And I always like to say, look where he ended up after making that bad decision to not have me on his team. So
he didn't have a prioritization metric. He didn't know what he was doing.
He didn't have a clue what he was doing, but he managed to get a 30-year NHL coaching career out of the deal, or whatever it was.
John, thank you so much for your final comments. I hope you see in the chat the impact that you've had on a number of people who attended today. Just so thankful for your honest reflections and this conversation. I hope you say you're just one small role player. You're an integral part of this community, and you've influenced our own thinking. You continue to do so, as well as Marley and Shannon, your entire organization. We learn from you, and you're inspiring. This is a means to an end, and the end goal is to make our communities better, ultimately, with scarce resources, and it's not easy to do. And you have found a way to shine in all of this work. I'm just thankful for having the chance to work together with you. And thank you for being our episode 1 Conn Smythe celebratory star one of the game.
Thank you Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's always fun to talk to you. And I always just seem, for some reason, to come away after talking with you just a little bit more energized. So thank you very much.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's a wrap. We will post this on the webpage. And John, just thanks again. Hope you have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to following very closely what happens in the next stages of your budget and watching those line items drift further back into the appendices. That'll be great.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Bye-bye.
Take care, John. See everybody.